So this is part 2 of chapter 4 of Running on Empty, Overcome Your Childhood Emotional Neglect by Jonice Webb. And the the title of the chapter is The Special Problem of Suicidal Feelings. Robin didn't just fight this battle, she lived it. Her life was organized around making sure that she did not reveal, see, know, or feel anything negative from within herself. It took a tremendous amount of energy. She was so bent on hiding the shameful, neglectful part of herself, Robin's version of the fatal flaw, from the world, that she couldn't let anyone get to know her too well. This is why her friends were not invited to her condo. She was afraid that they might catch a glimpse of some part of her that she didn't want to be seen. It's important to note that throughout all of this, Robin was intensely lonely. She knew that her parents, family, and friends loved her, but she didn't feel loved. It's hard to feel loved by people who don't really know you, and nobody really knew Robin, not even Robin. She felt completely isolated from the rest of humankind. Other people seemed happy and complete. They seemed to know each other, to care for each other, and to be free. Other people didn't seem to hide parts of themselves or to have this struggle. Robin felt that she was on the outside of life looking in, watching herself as if she were on a movie screen, disconnected, alone, and utterly unknown. She often wondered about the point of being alive. If life is so empty, with so much suffering, pain, and lack of reward, why live it? Since adolescence, Robin had had this outside-looking-in feeling. At age 13, she had started wondering what was wrong with her. She'd had a great childhood, so there was no explanation for how flawed she felt. There was something missing, something sick inside of her, a secret void. The only way she could soothe herself was to imagine being dead. Being dead would be such a relief. She did not have any intention to kill herself, but she reserved the possibility as a safety net. If she ever reached a point where she could no longer tolerate the pain, she could always end her life. Then there would be no more struggle, no more emptiness, no more loneliness, no more pain. Robin used fantasies of being dead and her secret knowledge of her safety net as her chief method of soothing herself from age 13 all the way through her adulthood, but she had not breathed a word of it to a single soul. Now let's go back to the day after the barbecue when Robin acted on her safety net. Here's what happened that day. Robin woke up with a moderate hangover and with memories of the excellent fun she'd had the night before. She poured herself some cereal and sat down in front of the TV. She felt a dark cloud hanging over her head as she had been fighting off hermit mode for a couple of weeks. She felt exhausted, lethargic, and empty, but above all, numb. She tried to make the numbness and emptiness go away by watching an old Andy Griffith episode. It didn't work, so she lay down on her sofa and started to imagine being dead, since this usually helped. This time it didn't seem to work, and instead the emptiness and pain just got more intense. She stood up and paced from one end of her living room to the other, back and forth, back and forth. As she did so, the dark cloud got darker, the emptiness deeper. Some part of her preoccupied mind noted that the Waltons had come on after Andy Griffith on the TV. This made her flash back to a memory from childhood in which her family chided her relentlessly for crying over a Waltons episode. She suddenly felt intense shame and self-hatred pile on top of her emptiness. Desperate to stop the worsening pain, Robin impulsively ran to her bathroom and swallowed every pill she could find in her medicine cabinet, many of which she had stored up just in case she ever got this desperate. As you can see, the Robin that everyone else knew and loved was not the real Robin. She was essentially a time bomb, sent to explode periodically. What was different about this particular situation that caused Robin to act on her fantasy? It was not a dramatic event. It was a TV show that brought her shame and self-blame into full force at the worst possible moment. Robin was already at risk before the Waltons show came on. But the family memory of criticism and humiliation was the final straw, plunging her even deeper into her own well of impossible aloneness and isolation. Ultimately, all it took was a Waltons rerun. Robin was lucky that her sister stopped by. Many people like Robin are not found until it's too late. These are the people who don't get help. They don't get to share or understand their pain, and they don't get to explain their final moments to anyone. These are often, I think, the people who leave their loved ones baffled and confused, never to understand what happened. Now let's revisit some of the people we met in Chapter 3 who will help us look at this issue from some different angles. But first, let's pause to consider the possible relationship between suicidal feelings and emotional neglect. Here I would like to remind you that human beings are designed to feel emotion. When that design is short-circuited, first by emotionally neglectful parents and later continued by the child himself as an adult, it throws off the whole system. Imagine ice cream made without sugar, or a computer program in which some of the most basic commands have been removed. Such is the malfunction of the human psyche when emotions are pushed out of it. In many ways, emptiness or numbness is worse than pain. Many people have told me that they would far prefer feeling anything to nothing. It is very difficult to acknowledge, make sense of, or put into words something that is absent. If you do succeed in putting emptiness into words to try to explain it to another person, it's very difficult for others to understand it. Emptiness seems like nothing to most people, and nothing is nothing, neither bad nor good. But in the case of a human being's internal functioning, nothing is definitely something. Emptiness is actually a feeling in and of itself. And I have discovered that it is a feeling that can be very intense and powerful. In fact, it has the power to drive people to do extreme things to escape it. Remember Simon, the handsome, successful 38-year-old who took up skydiving? You may recall that Simon had suicidal feelings because he felt so empty and numb. For him, life was devoid of connection, meaning, and passion. The thrills of skydiving were short-lived and were insufficient to give him a reason to want to live. David, on the other hand, had internalized the message, don't have feelings, don't show feelings, don't need anything from anyone, ever. His suicidal feelings were based upon his wish to fulfill this mandate which he had unwittingly absorbed from his parents. Since David was indeed a living, breathing human being with both feelings and needs, the only way he knew to accomplish that mandate was to be dead. Indeed, by the time I met him, he had already essentially stopped engaging in life. You may recall that Laura went through her life with her feelings completely cut off. She used beer and cutting to release them, but paid for it with intense shame. Laura lived in a prison of her own self-perceived flaws. She felt like damaged goods, unlovable, and disconnected. Laura's suicidal feelings stemmed from her anger at herself for having feelings and needs that she was unable to accept, acknowledge, or abolish. In these ways, she was similar to Robin. Cal had a plan to kill himself at the end of the millennium. The idea of dying in a big way was comforting to him, because he felt that people around him would finally be able to see the pain that he had been forever unable to communicate to them through words. When Cal was overcome by emotion, he used this grandiose escape fantasy to soothe himself. I believe these 4 emotionally neglected people were at high risk of acting upon their suicidal feelings. If they had not entered treatment in time, they each had the capacity for genuine self-harm. Here are some factors that all 4 plus Robin had in common. Emptiness and numbness, suffering in silence, questioning the meaning and value of his or her life. What's the point of living? Escape fantasy. It's important to note that David, Laura, Robin, and Cal all had loving, well-meaning parents. They all grew up in comfortable middle-class homes and were well cared for. None were abused, and they all had the trappings of a lovely childhood. For all of these people, there was really only one thing seriously wrong, and the thing that was wrong was invisible. It was something imperceptible, something missing that no one inside or outside of the family could see. For a person with emotional neglect, the numbness and suffering are held in silence and secret. Like all of the other emotions, they are not shared with anyone else. Over time, you may be able to imagine the toll that this would take on any human being. Like floodwaters over a river basin, they gradually erode away the bedrock of a person's existence, their energy, motivation, self-esteem, and engagement in life. And that's the end of chapter 4. I just want to say before I get cut off that in my own personal experience, I have never felt more depressed by hanging out with people, whether it was friends or family, who only and ever saw the bright side of life, period. Those people are not dealing with a full, emotionally mature basket of goodies. And they actually make me want to commit suicide in the past. Like, they just constantly made me feel like there was something wrong with me for seeing a problem that was actually reality, that was a problem. And I've always found that it was kind of fascistic. It was kind of paranoid and immature. These super hyper positive people. There's something sociopathic about that. And it needs to be discussed more. Like, the Tony Robbins of the world always freaked me out. This guy got a divorce. He's had eating disorders. He's had all kinds of problems. And he's made a cottage industry out of, like, overcoming it. But then when there's any kind of human frailty or weakness, he tends to fall back on the you did it to yourself, which is what the New Age communities do, the power positive thinking people. All that shit is bullshit. It's bullshit. If you're incapable of being a real serious person talking about real serious problems and issues that are based in reality, and you can't handle it, you're a coward. And you are potentially harming other people by not being able to honestly look at ugly feelings and unspeakable acts that one person commits against another or others. That's not going to solve the problem, people. The problems that we have cannot be solved by the previous attempts that didn't work. And doing it over and over and over again is a recipe for insanity. That's the dictionary definition of insanity. So all these, like, Pollyanna positive thinking, just nonsense. That's it. That's all over the self-help industry. It's all over the New Age world, all over these, love and lighters and people escaping, hiding in ashrams. It's really just an escape. Retreat is just another way of saying hiding and escape. I'm all for self-reflection, but a lot of this is just belly button gazing and vain. And I don't have any patience for it, because I see people who are wrecked inside, who maybe they don't want to kill themselves, but they're depressed and it's a living hell. And then they go to these fucking gurus who tell them it's your fault. Everything's your fault. Law of attraction. You attracted that. Your childhood family of origin has nothing to do with it. I mean, it's just sick, and it's got to end. And these people like Abraham Hicks and all these fuckers who practice and preach this shit are not doing anyone a lick of good in the long term. It's emotionally immature, and it's spiritual bypassing and fantasy. It's like materialist fantasy that revolves around, if I can think it, I can be it. I'm going to think myself into a red Ferrari. It's like this juvenile nonsense. So anyway, I'm going to leave some links below if you're feeling hopeless. I would say that if you're feeling hopeless, you probably grew up in a household where even if nothing was for want, except your emotional life, it was pushed aside and poo-pooed, and you were told never to feel a negative emotion. I'm willing to say that's a form of child abuse. Let's add that to the emotional abuse, list of things that can ruin a child's life and damage them permanently if left unchecked. All right, that's my little soapbox. Damn it. All right, so stop preaching the power of positive thinking. That shit doesn't work. I've tried reading that stuff, and as somebody who was formerly suicidally depressed, it didn't do shit for me. It just made me feel even worse about myself. And persevering is one thing. Being mentally strong is one thing. But this shit about how your negative emotions are toxic if you talk about them, if you acknowledge them, is just harmful and complete bullshit. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.